The destruction of the antediluvian world was more than a judgment. It was a genomic filtration. If the hybrids were erased, the proof should be written in our very blood. Next, we investigate the genetic choke point. Are we the result of slow evolution, or the survivors of a calculated global reset? The investigation into the DNA bottleneck begins. Mount Hermon stands as the primary witness in the Genesis 6 dossier, a physical node in the suspected incursion protocol. Its summit, locked at 2,814 meters above sea level, occupies a fixed position at 33 degrees, 24 minutes, 58 seconds north, 35 degrees, 51 minutes, 27 seconds east. This is not a random elevation. The mountain's location on the 33rd parallel, a coordinate that recurs in occult and esoteric traditions, has been flagged in multiple data sets as a signature of intentional targeting. The summit forms an oval plateau, hewn from limestone, and is crowned by the ruins of Qasr Antar, a rectangular Roman temple first documented in 1869. The inscription on its stele, dated to 242 CE, dedicates the site to the gods of Kiberia, embedding Hermon within a continuum of cultic occupation that predates the Roman Empire and extends back through Phoenician and Hellenistic layers. Surrounding the summit, the slopes of Hermon are littered with the remains of some 30 shrines and temples, their distribution mapped by GNSS and SRTM datasets. These structures do not align to the cardinal points or global grid, but cluster around springs and high ground, forming a sacred landscape rather than a geometric pattern. The absence of celestial or meridian alignment in their construction undermines claims of a mathematical breadcrumb trail. Yet the density of cultic sites signals a persistent recognition of Hermon as a threshold, an interface between domains. No archaeological layer or stratified anomaly confirms the summit as a literal portal. Excavations reveal a sequence of occupation, Roman shrines atop earlier Phoenician platforms, with no evidence for pre-Roman megalithic engineering at the summit itself. The Golan environs, including Tel Dan and Banias, display continuous habitation from the Neolithic through the Iron Age. But their ritual architecture points to regional religious evolution, not system breach. Still, Hermon's prominence, both geographic and symbolic, anchors the Watcher's descent in a real mappable geography. Every subsequent data transfer, whether metallurgical, pharmacological, or astronomical, traces back to this summit, establishing Hermon as the control node in the Incursion protocol. The site's profile, stripped of myth, remains the primary locus for forensic inquiry. The Enochian Archive functions as the primary deposition in the Genesis 6 case file. Here, ancient manuscripts are treated not as myth, but as witness statements, each bearing its own chain of custody, each subject to forensic scrutiny. The core body of evidence is distributed across 3 manuscript streams: Ethiopic, Aramaic, and Greek. The Ethiopic tradition preserves the only complete text of 1 Enoch, with extant manuscripts dating from the 15th century, but copying an archetype established by the 4th century CE. In parallel, the Aramaic fragments recovered from Qumran Cave 4, cataloged as 4Q201 through 4Q212, date to the 2nd century BCE and confirm that the knowledge transfer narrative was already circulating in the Levant centuries before the Christian era. Greek and Latin translations, though partial, echo the same charges, establishing cross-linguistic stability in the allegations against the Watchers. The protocol of the Incursion is detailed in a series of explicit depositions. Azazel is indicted for the unauthorized dissemination of metallurgical procedures, swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, along with the protocols for alloying and working metals. The texts record the verb taught in the Ethiopic and Aramaic, while the Greek sometimes softens this to showed or revealed, a variance that shifts culpability but not the substance of the charge. Cosmetics and sensory manipulation are listed as secondary vectors, the use of antimony for the eyelids, the crafting of bracelets and ornaments, and the extraction of pigments and dyes. Semjaza is named as the chief conspirator, responsible for oath-binding and enchantments, while his cohort, Barakel, Kokabul, Armaros, and others, are charged with the illicit transfer of astronomical, astrological, and divinatory protocols. The cumulative effect is a system-wide breach, the deliberate download of forbidden knowledge into the human domain. Each manuscript stream is cataloged for provenance and verb consistency. The Ethiopic full text stands as the most complete, but the 2nd century BCE Aramaic fragments at Qumran serve as the earliest attestation, predating the canonical Gospels and aligning with the period of technological acceleration in the Levant. Greek codices, though fragmentary, confirm the same core allegations, their minor lexical drift insufficient to erase the underlying data transfer event. The Enochian Archive, therefore, is not a mythic echo, but a structured deposition, a charge sheet enumerating specific vectors of system corruption. Metallurgy, pharmakeia, astronomy, and ritual enchantment are not background motifs, but actionable claims, each traceable to name perpetrators and preserved through a demonstrable manuscript chain. The next phase of the investigation will cross-examine these textual allegations against the physical and chemical record, testing whether the knowledge deposited in the archive left measurable fingerprints in the archaeological strata. Azazel is logged as the primary vector for metallurgical data transfer in the Genesis 6 Incursion protocol. The Enochian deposition, cross-verified in the Aramaic Qumran fragments and the Ethiopic manuscript chain, charges Azazel with instructing humanity in the fabrication of swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, the full suite of weaponized alloys. The verb taught recurs in the Ethiopic and Aramaic streams, framing this as a systematic breach, not a passive demonstration. The protocol lists the extraction and manipulation of metals as a core vector of system corruption, directly linked to a spike in anthropogenic violence and environmental degradation. Nahal Mishmar enters the record as the primary forensic exhibit, radiocarbon dated from 3500 BCE to 3200 BCE. This cache, recovered from a cave near the Dead Sea, contains over 400 copper alloy artifacts, crowns, scepters, and mace heads, engineered with lost wax casting and arsenical copper alloys. Laboratory assays report arsenic concentrations between 4 and 7%, a level that signals advanced smelting control for the period. The presence of complex molds, investment residues, and high-purity copper in the hoard predates the widespread adoption of tin bronze by nearly a millennium. No gradual ramp is visible in the compositional data. The sophistication appears abruptly, with no clear local antecedent. Comparative metallurgical surveys across the Levant and Anatolia reveal a slower, more incremental evolution in alloying techniques. The Mishmar spike stands as a discontinuity, a statistical outlier in the regional technological baseline. The data align with the textual charge sheet, a targeted download of forbidden knowledge executed with precision and intent. Azazel's deposition is corroborated by the artifact record, elevating the Metallurgy Spike from mythic allegation to demonstrable system breach. Pharmakeia enters the Genesis 6 dossier as the next vector of system corruption. The Enochian deposition links Azazel and his cohort to the illicit transfer of chemical protocols, the extraction of pigments, the compounding of cosmetics, and the manipulation of sensory states. The charge sheet specifies the beautifying of the eyelids and enchantments, framing these as deliberate alterations of the human interface, an attack on cognition and perception, not merely aesthetics. To test the plausibility of this data transfer, residue analysis was deployed on a late Bronze Age cosmetic vessel, recovered from Tel Kiryat Shefer. Gas chromatography mass spectrometry returned a clear signature. Galena was the dominant black pigment, cinnabar the red, and complex aromatic resins such as labdanum, pine, and myrrh were used as binders or perfumes. The presence of both lead and mercury compounds signals a working knowledge of toxicology and mineral sourcing. These are not incidental contaminants. Their ratios and preparation methods indicate intentional formulation, consistent with recipes later codified in Egyptian and Mesopotamian pharmacopoeia. Plant resin markers in the sample, terpenoids and phenolics, suggest advanced extraction techniques, likely involving heat or solvent-based separation. The vessel's residue profile matches textual claims of root cutting and sorcery, but reveals no evidence of synthetic alkaloids or novel compounds beyond the established Near Eastern baseline. The sophistication is notable but not anomalous. The compounds align with a regional tradition of cosmetic science rather than an abrupt technological spike. The forensic record therefore registers pharmakeia as a plausible data transfer, an incremental but targeted breach that expands the scope of the Incursion protocol from metallurgy to chemical manipulation. The Watcher protocol, as logged in the Enochian deposition, includes a charge of astronomical data transfer, an alleged download of celestial mapping and precessional knowledge. The forensic record demands a stress test. Does any surviving monument in the Hermon control zone encode knowledge that exceeds the expected baseline? The selected exhibit is Rujim el-Hiri, a megalithic stone circle on the Golan, constructed around 3000 BCE. Its axis deviates by nearly 7 degrees from true north, a variance that rules out intended cardinal alignment. Horizon markers suggest solar and lunar orientations, but the azimuthal spread lacks the precision necessary to capture the precessional drift, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, which completes a cycle every 26,000 years. Precession requires a tracking interval and angular accuracy that no known Levantine monument or petroglyph achieves prior to the Hellenistic era. The protocol's claim of a celestial download is further tested against the Mul-Apen star tables of Mesopotamia and the orientation of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures. Both encode horizon-based astronomy, solstice sunrises, lunar standstills, but neither demonstrates precessional awareness. The earliest documented recognition of axial precession appears in the writings of Hipparchus in the 2nd century BCE, over 2 millennia after the alleged incursion. Statistical analysis of monument alignments across the Near East yields a distribution indistinguishable from random clustering, with no evidence of a mathematical breadcrumb trail. The architecture of the stars, as preserved in stone, fails to meet the decision rule for an external, non-human data transfer. The celestial vector of system corruption, while present in the textual charge sheet, remains uncorroborated by the physical record. This closes the technology block and prepares the investigation for a macro-analysis of numeric signatures on the global grid. The 33.33 nexus enters the forensic record as a testable claim of intentional geodesic placement. The hypothesis asserts that Mount Hermon's latitude and longitudinal offset from the Paris meridian encode a mathematical signature, an engineered marker of Incursion protocol. To adjudicate this, a null model was constructed. The modern Near Eastern landmass, approximately 6 million square kilometers, served as the spatial envelope. 1 million random point sets were generated within this boundary, each set mirroring the number and distribution of sites cited in the Watcher dossier. For each simulation, the absolute deviation from 33.33 degrees north was calculated, as well as the longitudinal offset from the Paris meridian. These deviations were combined into a single metric, then ranked against the observed values for Mount Hermon and Mount Zion. The outcome is unambiguous. The observed metric for the real sites does not fall below the 5th percentile of the simulated distribution. The p-value exceeds the 0.05 threshold, indicating that the apparent clustering is statistically indistinguishable from random chance. The Paris meridian offset, often cited in numerological treatments, fails to reach empirical significance under this protocol. The data do not support the claim of a deliberate mathematical breadcrumb trail. The 33.33 nexus, when subjected to forensic geodesy, resolves as a post hoc artifact, a product of selection bias rather than system corruption. The investigation now pivots from numeric signatures to biological evidence, as the Genesis 6 dossier transitions from the geometry of incursion to the genetics of contamination. The Genesis 6 dossier logs the Watcher's breeding program as a critical vector of system corruption. The protocol, as outlined in Genesis 6 verse 4 and 1 Enoch, alleges a targeted incursion, non-human entities initiating unauthorized hybridization with Homo sapiens. The resulting phenotype, the Nephilim, is described in witness depositions as mighty men of old, a class apart from the human baseline. Yet, when this claim is subjected to forensic audit, the evidentiary chain breaks down. No radiocarbon-dated remains of anomalous stature have entered the peer-reviewed osteological record. Historical reports of so-called giant skeletons, such as the Giant of Hazar, consistently fail provenance checks, lacking secure stratigraphic context or verifiable chain of custody. Many such finds have been dismissed as misidentified megafauna, mismeasured bones, or outright hoaxes. The absence of authentic, datable skeletal material means the hybrid narrative remains an uncorroborated charge. The protocol's claims of biological system corruption advance into the queue of testable hypotheses awaiting genomic data. Current ancient DNA surveys of Levantine populations reveal Neanderthal admixture at levels consistent with Eurasian norms. No evidence of a divergent, non-human haplogroup or allele frequency spike linked to extreme stature. The investigation now prioritizes the acquisition of secure remains and high-throughput sequencing to resolve the question of genomic contamination in the next phase of the Genesis 6 case file. Canonical gatekeeping functions as a secondary firewall in the Genesis 6 incident file. The data transfer outlined in the Enochian Archive, explicit allegations of system corruption via metallurgy, pharmakeia, and forbidden astronomy, was not erased by decree, but systematically sidelined. Jerome, in his 4th century commentary, classified the Book of Enoch as apocryphal and spurious, warning against its citation in doctrinal contexts. Augustine, writing in the early 5th century, dismissed the Watcher narrative as an allegory, instructing that such accounts be read for moral instruction rather than forensic history. No formal council, neither Nicaea nor Constantinople, issued a binding ban on Enoch, yet the absence of endorsement proved decisive. The book was excluded from both the Greek Septuagint and Jerome's Latin Vulgate, severing its access to the authorized data stream of Western Christendom. Patristic silence, reinforced by periodic denunciations, produced a deliberate marginalization of the Enochian deposition. The effect was not total erasure, but a narrowing of the evidentiary pipeline. Witness statements implicating the Watchers in systemic corruption were reclassified as myth, not because of proven falsity, but through institutional labeling and omission. This protocol of marginalization did not destroy the data. It buried it beneath layers of sanctioned interpretation, ensuring that the most explicit records of the Incursion protocol would remain peripheral, visible only to those who search beyond the canonical perimeter. The Genesis 6 case file is now subject to formal evidentiary ruling. All data streams, textual depositions, archaeological inventories, chemical analyses, geodesic models, and genetic audits are assigned to a three-band rubric: demonstrable, plausible, or speculative. Demonstrable status is reserved for the consistent transmission of forbidden knowledge in the Enochian Archive, corroborated across Ethiopic, Aramaic, and Greek witness chains. Plausible status is applied to the circumstantial alignment between textual allegations and select material upticks, such as the abrupt sophistication in metallurgy and the chemical signatures of pharmakeia, though these fall short of statistical anomaly. Speculative status is assigned to claims of celestial downloads, mathematical breadcrumb trails, and biological system corruption, each unsupported by empirical data or reproducible metrics. Canonical suppression is logged as a moderate vector, substantiated by patristic commentary and institutional omission rather than formal decree. The protocol concludes, the Genesis 6 incursion encodes a tradition of targeted data transfer and system contamination, but the absence of secure genomic evidence locks the Nephilim hypothesis in abeyance. Flood protocol is entered as a necessary decontamination event, pending genomic audit. The protocol now advances from hypothesis to an actionable test. The Genesis 6 contamination claim, hybridization between Homo sapiens and a non-human vector, moves into the domain of empirical audit. The next phase initiates a targeted ancient DNA assay pipeline designed to interrogate remains from secure, stratified contexts near Mount Hermon, Megiddo, and the Golan Heights. The primary objective is to detect non-local admixture exceeding 5%, which would signal an exogenous genetic event incompatible with known Eurasian or African lineages. Analytical routes include runs of homozygosity to flag recent inbreeding, QPADM modeling to parse admixture sources, and strict contamination controls using petrous bone extraction and high-coverage sequencing. Sampling protocols prioritize late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age burials, with a focus on outlier phenotypes and burial clusters flagged in the archaeological record. The decision rule is clear. Only a reproducible, statistically significant deviation from regional genetic baselines can elevate the Nephilim hypothesis from speculative to demonstrable. Until such data are in hand, the Genesis 6 breeding program remains an open file, pending the verdict of the genome. Today we operate within protocols shaped by ancient data transfers, systems still haunted by the echoes of a 5,000-year-old incursion. The Genesis 6 contamination was not erased, only contained. As genomics and AI accelerate, the question is not if system breaches recur, but whether we will recognize the signature. In every line of code and every strand of DNA, the myth remains a live protocol. Your analysis continues here.